Okay, so over here, in the second counter argument, we can argue that there have been many efforts by social enterprises and NGOs to create a more inclusive environment for people who are physically and mentally disabled. Stigma is a phenomenon that can be alleviated through more awareness. Therefore, their efforts are important in bridging the gap between quote unquote normal people and the ones who are marginalized because of their physical or mental handicapness. Now, we need to understand that the idea of normal is also constructed, and it does not necessarily mean that those who are born slightly different from everybody else is completely abnormal. Why do I say so? While we understand many of these physical or mental disabilities are biological in nature, it is also the result of the environment. So I'm going to be talking more about the historical aspects of it. This is not something that you necessarily need to talk about in your GPSA. Let's say if you want to talk about inclusivity and how a lot of mental disorders actually come because of historical reasons. But again, this is a very good insight as to what kind of legacies that we have from the past. And so if let's say this question is about how Singapore has been coping for the past 50 years, um, you can definitely take a look at the circumstances during that period of time and you can bring it into your GPSA, but make it very relevant and make sure that you talk about the current affairs. That's why for the historical stuff that I'm going to be talking about now, it's not necessary for you to write. Okay? So in China, there was an opium war. There were two of them that were in the 19th century. It also actually spread to Singapore because a lot of the Chinese they migrated to Singapore from China during that period of time. Now, this is an important event. Why? Because the Western powers wanted to establish their overseas market and gain power because it was the era of colonialism. And so the British monopolized opium in India. Now, in order to maximize revenue, it sold its opium to independent foreign traders in exchange for silver. Now, the opium was then transported to China and sold to Chinese middlemen who retailed the drug inside the country. Now, this means that the Chinese have less silver, but they have more drugs because of uh, the amount of drugs that actually went in. And the thing about drugs is that when there is supply, there will always be demand, and more people will be addicted. So it's like a cycle. Now, drugs are known to change certain parts of the brain. Let's say for it triggers like some sort of pleasure and it numbs you as well because you don't really need to think about what to do and you don't need to respond to like let's say pain. Now, a lot of them also become triggers for not only being high but mental disorders such as depression and autism. I think the reason why depression is the case because generally when somebody is addicted, he wants more and more of it. So when he doesn't have it, he gets really depressed and he has a lot of withdrawal tendencies. Now, with regards to autism, that's because biologically speaking, there's something wrong with, not really something wrong, but something is different with the person's brain. It's something has been changed. So if you think about it, it's kind of like the result of mankind's actions rather than something that is completely natural and biological. So I don't have the exact numbers, but think about it. If our physical features are affected by our grandparents, this also means our mentality will be as well, regardless of how much we try to avoid it. So it's not only about mental disorders, but also about how we think. Now, why am I talking about psychology here? I'm trying to prove the point that we may not be necessarily be as normal as we think just because we don't have a mental disorder that's considered severe, such as an autistic child who can't concentrate. But again, they make up for it. There's this thing in nature where you have to have a compromise, but at the same time you will be compensated by having higher intelligence in certain areas. So, like, let's say there was a research in BBC that says that those who are geniuses tend to be unhappier than normal people because you overthink And so our grandfathers were there during the Opium War and had to suffer through poverty, malnutrition, and unhealthy addictions. Now, our mentality is affected by them, such as fear, because there was also war during that period of time. Now, this may also contribute to the mental disorders that I'm talking about, and also to our fear and insecurities. Now, why is this so important? Because if you think about it, a lot of the insecurities that we have, like it becomes xenophobia. Because if you think about it, we are always scared of those who we don't really know, and we're scared that, let's say, they're taking our jobs or they're taking our property. They're just here to marry off the guys, and after that, they're gonna run away because that's what happened to some people from China who became permanent residents in Singapore. That's why the government tightened the regulations, right? So now I'm gonna be talking more about the mentally and the physically disabled. Now, they are also a victim of their families and circumstances. So what does this mean as well? If you think about it, if we engage in healthy conversations, and we ensure that the family is safe for the child, and there is less trauma for the child even when he's still a baby. In this case, there will be a lot less likelihood that there will be autism in the family. And even if there is, we can still do a lot of things to ensure that up to become a very healthy person. Because when he's emotionally healthy, at least the negativity does not get carried so much down the line. Now, because of this, you realize how much you're actually affected by your family. And so think about all the issues that are happening now in society. Why exactly are, let's say, Singaporean stereotyped as being unfriendly or like fearful of other people, and so they tend to be really closed off. So think about it in terms of what happened in the past, like in terms of the war. And so in here we have observed that opium is actually one of the reasons why, like a lot of addictions and poverty during that period of time. Now, as we are endowed with the ability to think beyond ourselves and care for others, this becomes an important feature that can enable a more inclusive Singapore to happen. You need to think back and look at yourself. And from here, internally, then maybe Singapore is able to progress in that sense, because everything now depends on us rather than the government. It has to be civil society, and there has to be a more sincere and genuine effort in helping these people, because if not, then there's no point why the social enterprises and the NGOs want to come down and and host events for us, because the events are only useful when we use them, right? So we need to soften these judgments. Now, back to the counter argument. What's important in showing a depth of knowledge about how people feel that their life that society tends to endeavor is fulfilling. Now, this is especially true in Singapore. Now, this is the reason we look to society where they help others, and by building NGOs or even participate part in their events, so that they can form this connection between people, as it is deemed as being lacking in Singapore. Now, you can look at the data online about the happiness index and how Singapore is one of the lowest, like even in developed countries. Now, and this is also important in the sense that people actually come here, like let's say the expatriates especially, they actually come here because of financial reasons. It's not really because the country is happy or very nice to live in, So this is different from countries like Switzerland or Denmark, which have attained a very high level of happiness levels and non-material standard of living. Now, people are attracted to them because they're green, they're relaxed, but they also have high productivity. So it doesn't mean that they're completely lazy, but they know how to balance work and life, their social life, especially. And so, because of these initiatives that civil societies initiate, Singapore has become a more inclusive place. Now, it is because what people go through in education institutions that they resent the lack of teamwork and want to change whatever they can, right? So, the thing about Singapore is that in your essay, you can probably also talk about how the schools are elitist in a way that there's also a lot of bias, like in schools, just because of the care more because they'll even on the same level as them. So doesn't mean that if the system is disadvantageous to, like, let's say the handicap, this doesn't mean that people don't actually care, because there will always be people who care about these issues. So you can look at it in a different angle. Okay, so let's move on to the argument. Give me a minute. Sorry, computer is being slow. Okay, now over here, I didn't really write a full paragraph for this, but we all know that even though, of course, there are a lot of efforts that we can uh, see, like even in Singapore itself, like to make it more inclusive, it doesn't mean that they are very effective. Now, the thing about stigma is that it is extremely deep seated. So it doesn't get removed very easily just because there are some events by social enterprises. It doesn't mean that people will completely don't have the stigma, or even sometimes it may not even be alleviated in that sense. Now, of course, we understand that there is more awareness of the issue, like let's say people who have AIDS, um, or like let's say people who are gay in that sense, through events and activities, does not mean that discrimination will not happen, because it's just the way things are. Systemically speaking, a lot of the biasness will still be there. And so Singapore definitely doesn't rank very high in a lot of acceptance issues. Now, inclusivity needs to be reflected by how people treat each other on a daily basis through sincere care rather than only caring because the people are seen as a burden and thus need pity. Now, this is where it gets really tricky, because you have NGOs and social enterprises that want to make a difference, but they not may not necessarily achieve it, or maybe they have a agenda behind their supposed altruistic vision. Now, I was working in a social enterprise that has now become an NGO called Envisage Education. It is created by this man called Stanley Chia. He received an award for creating another company called Collegify that allows students to have preparatory courses before they go to Ivy League schools. But this social enterprise slash NGO, it doesn't really solve the crux of the problem, because he aims to inculcate more compassion and wants more students, especially, to actually build their social enterprise from here. Now, the thing about this is that it has a very good goal and it's admirable of him, but at the same time, the way he does things and the missions that he uses, the kind of programs that he has, it's it's not that it's bad, but it's just that it's ineffective, because you're teaching like secondary two students how to be nice to other people. But the problem is that you can't teach people how to be nice. It has to be from the family. Everything that you go through, a lot of them are influenced by your family, the way you behave. So in schools, definitely you'll be groomed, but that doesn't mean that your complete behavior will change just because somebody, especially in this case, it's an external vendor, comes down to the school and teaches you. And of course, you will be giving like politically correct answers. So what's exactly the point here? So in the end, a lot of incentives are good, but it's very ineffective because it has to come from the family, the root of the issue, right? So incentives such as another NGO, another social enterprise actually, such as Dialogue may enable people to empathize with blind people because you get to experience the world blindfolded and you go through a few activities. But this doesn't mean that there's any continuity. What now, in terms of the business, there is, but the blind will continue to become guides and may be empowered, but only to a small extent. Now, I'm talking also about, let's say, the people who are working in 18 Chefs, because 18 is actually the name of the gang where the owner came from. So 18 Chefs hires ex-convicts. But what does that mean? You can definitely help them getting a job, yes. But what's the point of getting like a full-time job that's only a waiter? Now, I'm not talking about whether a waiter is degradatory or not. It's not. It's a good, honest job. But if you want to empower them, shouldn't you be giving them real skills that they can use in the corporate world? Why do you have to give them the low end jobs, right? So this is the kind of things that you need to think about. I'm not saying that it's easy to do this, but at least give them some training so that they can move up the corporate ladder or they can even be a banker or something. It's not about the status, but it's also about the kind of money that they can make, because that's the kind of empowerment that we're looking at. Maybe you want to help them facilitate their transition to opening their own business, right? Because these are the kind of people who didn't think that this life is possible, but now they have to, they just survive day in, day out. And how much are they making from by being a waiter? In the end, a lot of them may also come from low income families, and so it doesn't really help, right? So being a waiter may be a first step to allowing them to integrate to society, but it's definitely not a long-term solution to whatever problems that they have, because they need something more in life. They need to get direction. They need to have some control over their lives, responsibility over something, right? So now, I'm going back to the dialogue in the dark. Now, for the blind guy, it's true empowerment that means that he's able to control his life without having to spend most of his time being an employee who may be even neglected, as visitors will be focused on the activities and will not probably even develop a long-lasting relationship with him. Come on, this is a problem because you can help it. You can, go for events and help people, but at the same time, it's so short lasting, right? So, unless there are systemic incentives in society to make people more inclined to accept those who are different from them, it is difficult to do so on a large scale. Now, that means the system has to enable this to happen. The relationship has to be there. If not, there is not much point, right? So,